The moment she met her new boss, her world stopped. It wasn't his power or success that shook her. It was the man she never stopped loving. Wait, is that him? Emma's heart skipped a beat, her chest tightening as she pushed open the glass doors of the sleek, modern office building. The lobby was buzzing with activity, employees moving purposefully, phones ringing, the soft hum of printers. But somehow, the noise around her faded. Her pulse was loud in her ears, matching the rapid rhythm of her racing thoughts. She had been nervous about her first day at the new job. Of course, the first days were always nerve-wracking, but nothing could have prepared her for this. There, standing confidently at the head of the conference room, was Daniel. Her Daniel, the same man who had broken her heart 3 years ago, the one she had sworn she would never see again. He looked just as she remembered, sharp jawline, piercing blue eyes that seemed to read right through her, and that calm, almost infuriatingly confident posture that had once made her weak in the knees. His tailored navy suit emphasized his broad shoulders, and his presence seemed to fill the room without him moving an inch. Emma froze, clutching her folder so tightly her knuckles went white. She could feel her face flush, her stomach twisting into knots. She had carefully prepared for today, rehearsing introductions, planning how to make a strong first impression, and now she couldn't even speak. Daniel's eyes flicked toward her. For a split second, she swore she saw the tiniest flicker of recognition, a subtle softening around the edges of his sharp gaze, a micro-smile that barely touched his lips. That small acknowledgement was enough to send her emotions into overdrive. "Emma," his voice cut through her daze, low, calm, familiar. "You're here." Her throat went dry. She managed a small nod, forcing herself to look professional despite the chaos in her mind. Yes, I am." Her words sounded almost foreign to her own ears, tight and clipped. The tension in the room was almost palpable. Every eye seemed to linger on her. Though she knew most of the others probably had no idea what was going on. Emma could feel their curiosity, their subtle judgment, but it barely registered. Her world had narrowed to this single moment. Daniel standing there, unchanged, yet somehow different. Memories rushed back like a tidal wave she hadn't realized she'd kept buried. She remembered the way he used to laugh, deep, unrestrained, and infectious. She remembered the nights spent talking for hours, sharing dreams that now seemed impossibly distant. She remembered the heartbreak, the sharp sting of betrayal, the nights she cried herself to sleep because she thought he would never love her the way she had loved him. And yet here he was, Daniel, smiling, almost imperceptibly, but enough to remind her that some part of him had remembered her too. Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing thoughts. This is a job. This is work. You are here to do your job, not to think about the past. She forced herself to walk toward her desk, each step heavy, measured, conscious. Her shoes clicked softly against the polished floor, an audible reminder of her heartbeat. Daniel watched her approach. He didn't interrupt, didn't speak, but she could feel the weight of his gaze. He wasn't the same man she had once loved entirely. Time had refined him, shaped him, made him more controlled, more deliberate. Yet beneath that composed exterior, there was still a spark, a warmth, a familiarity that made her stomach flutter despite her efforts to remain detached. She arrived at her desk, trying to settle her shaking hands. She arranged her notebook, straightened the papers, and avoided looking at him directly. But it was impossible not to catch his eyes from the corner of her vision. There was curiosity there, yes, but something more, something unspoken that made her pulse quicken. The office manager, oblivious to the history between them, began giving her the standard orientation instructions. Emma nodded, smiled, and answered questions with rehearsed politeness, all while feeling like she was moving through a fog. Every word spoken by the manager seemed distant, echoing faintly against the backdrop of her memory. Daniel leaning against the doorway, casual but commanding, his presence impossible to ignore. Emma's mind wandered. How could fate be so cruel? Or maybe it's not cruel. Maybe it's testing me. She tried to remind herself that this was her professional life now, that she needed to focus on deadlines, responsibilities, and tasks, not old feelings. But the sight of him, the very man who had haunted her dreams for years, stirred something inside her that she hadn't expected. Daniel finally moved, clearing his throat as if to officially start the meeting. He didn't rush, didn't smirk, but she could see the subtle ways he carried himself, the tilt of his head, the softening of his jaw when he looked at her, all the small details that reminded her of the man she had loved. And with that, Emma realized something. No matter how carefully she had tried to bury the past, it had found a way to catch up with her, in the most unexpected, electrifying, terrifying way. She swallowed hard, straightened her spine, and forced herself to focus. This was her first day. She had a job to do. But deep down, a part of her already knew that today would be different, because the man who had broken her heart, the man she had once loved, was no longer a memory. He was standing there, in the same room, looking at her in a way that made her realize that the past wasn't gone. It was very much alive. And just like that, Emma knew her life was about to change forever. Later that morning, Daniel's assistant quietly knocked on Emma's office door. "Mr. Daniel would like to see you in his office," she said, glancing at Emma with a polite, almost knowing smile. Emma swallowed hard, her stomach tightening as she nodded. She had been expecting some form of formal introduction, perhaps a standard orientation, but something about the tone of the message made her pulse spike. With cautious steps, she made her way down the sleek hallway, the polished floors reflecting the sunlight streaming through the tall glass windows. Her mind was a swirl of thoughts. Stay professional. Don't let your emotions show. You're here to work. Yet, despite her best intentions, her heart thumped loudly, almost as if it were warning her that nothing about today would be normal. She paused for a brief second outside Daniel's office, straightened her blouse, and inhaled deeply. Then she opened the door. Daniel was sitting behind his large mahogany desk, reviewing some documents. But the moment he looked up, the room seemed to shrink. His piercing blue eyes found hers immediately, and that calm, confident demeanor she had remembered so well returned in a heartbeat. There was a warmth in his gaze, a familiarity that made her chest tighten, and for a split second, Emma felt as though she had stepped back in time. "Sit down," he said softly, gesturing to the chair across from him. His voice was smooth, measured, but there was a subtle undercurrent, a hint of the man she had once loved. Emma obeyed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, heart pounding like a drum. I didn't expect to see you here," she admitted, forcing herself to sound casual. Her words felt shaky even as she said them, and she knew her flushed face gave her away. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, a soft smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I didn't expect you to take this job," he said, voice calm but layered with emotion. "It's good to see you again." Emma's pulse quickened. His words, so simple yet so loaded, made her chest ache. She wanted to respond, to ask how he had been, to tell him 100 things she had rehearsed in her mind over the past 3 years. Instead, she simply nodded, trying to keep her breathing steady. Focus. This is work. But as she settled into the chair, she noticed all the little ways he remembered her. The way he smiled when he caught her fiddling with her pen, just as he used to notice small quirks during long conversations years ago. The gentle way he offered her a glass of water without her asking. Even the faint scent lingering in the air that reminded her of the cologne he had once worn. They began discussing projects, deadlines, and tasks. The topics were professional, routine, but no matter how much Emma tried to concentrate, her mind kept drifting to the man sitting opposite her. Daniel's voice was steady, but every so often, there was a softness that made her remember the long nights they had spent talking, laughing, and dreaming together. "So, for this project, I need your input on the client's proposal by Thursday," he said, sliding a document toward her. She picked it up carefully, nodding, and noticed that he was observing her, not in a scrutinizing way, but in a way that suggested he was genuinely interested. Emma forced herself to focus on the paper, but she could feel his gaze linger. She tried to concentrate on numbers, bullet points, and deadlines, but the subtle tension between them made it nearly impossible. Every glance from him sent tiny shocks through her chest. She was painfully aware of the magnetic pull she still felt, even after all these years. There was a moment when he leaned slightly forward, his eyes catching hers. "You've always been meticulous, Emma," he said softly, almost like a memory whispered into reality. Her hand trembled slightly as she turned a page, and she realized he noticed. His expression softened further, warm, familiar, but tinged with something unspoken, perhaps regret, perhaps longing, perhaps both. She wanted to ask questions, to understand why he was here, why he had taken this position, why fate had thrown them together again. But words failed her. Instead, she nodded again, answering the occasional question about her approach to work or her experience on previous projects. Each answer felt like walking a tightrope, balancing professionalism with the flood of old feelings, threatening to consume her. Minutes felt like hours. Emma's mind raced as memories she had tried to suppress came rushing back. She remembered the mornings they had spent drinking coffee at the tiny cafe around the corner, laughing until their stomachs hurt. She remembered the late-night drives, the whispered promises, and the heartbreak when he had left without a proper goodbye. And now he was here, in front of her, unchanged in many ways, yet somehow deeper, wiser, more composed. Finally, Daniel leaned back, offering her a small, tentative smile. "I'm glad you're here," he said quietly. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of years, unspoken emotions, and unfinished business. Emma swallowed, trying to steady herself. Her pulse was still racing, and her hands were clammy. But she realized something. Seeing him again wasn't just shocking. It was awakening a part of her she had long tried to forget. A part of her that still cared, that still remembered, that still hoped. As she left his office, documents in hand, she felt the lingering tension, the unspoken words, and the spark between them. Work had been done, tasks had been assigned, but something else had happened too, something far more powerful. A bridge had been quietly rebuilt, a connection that time and distance had failed to sever. And as she returned to her desk, Emma realized that this was only the beginning. She had walked into the office expecting a routine day, but instead, she had stepped into a storm of emotions, memories, and possibilities. Daniel wasn't just her boss. He was the man who had once held her heart. And now he was back, closer than she ever imagined, reminding her that the past had not forgotten her, and perhaps neither had he. Her heart raced, but for the first time that morning, she allowed herself a small, private smile. The day had started as ordinary, but it had ended with a quiet, powerful realization. Nothing would ever be the same again. Over the next few weeks, Emma's world slowly shifted from professional routine to a subtle, unspoken tension that she couldn't ignore. At first, it was almost imperceptible. A glance that lingered too long, a thoughtful question about her work, a compliment that seemed personal rather than generic. Daniel had always been observant, and now, in his role as her boss, those small attentions were magnified, catching her off guard every time. Every morning, she walked into the office trying to focus, reminding herself that this was her career, her independence, her life, not a playground for old emotions. And yet, it was impossible not to notice the little things. He would check in personally on her projects, asking about minor details, giving feedback that was constructive, but carried a subtle warmth that made her pulse quicken. One afternoon, Emma was working on a marketing presentation, reviewing charts and graphs on her laptop, when she felt someone standing nearby. She looked up to see Daniel, casually leaning against the doorway. "How's it coming along?" he asked softly, his tone professional but layered with something else. A warmth she remembered, a softness that had drawn her to him years ago. Emma's heart skipped. "It's almost done," she replied, her voice steady but her mind racing. He nodded, stepping closer to glance at her screen. "You've always been meticulous, you know," he said, his voice low and deliberate. Emma's chest tightened, and she swallowed hard. How could someone who had left her so abruptly, so painfully, still have the ability to make her feel this way? Her stomach fluttered, her palms slightly damp. She looked down at her hands, trying to regain composure, but she could feel his presence, his attention, pressing gently against the walls she had built around herself. She wanted to run, to retreat behind her professionalism, to focus only on the spreadsheets and slides before her. But when she glanced up again, she met his eyes, calm, steady, and surprisingly tender. In them, she saw something she hadn't seen in years. A man who hadn't let go. A man who had thought about her, missed her, and perhaps regretted the way things had ended. Days passed, and each interaction became a dance, subtle, careful, but charged with meaning. A shared joke during a team meeting, a gentle correction of a mistake, phrased in a way that encouraged rather than criticized. The way he remembered small details, the way she took her coffee, the way she organized her notes, the color of the pen she used for highlighting key points. All of it made her acutely aware that Daniel was paying attention, truly paying attention, in a way that went beyond professional courtesy. Emma noticed herself smiling more, caught off guard by thoughts of him during moments of silence. She would catch herself replaying small interactions in her head, his laugh at a clever comment she had made, the way he tilted his head when concentrating, the rare but fleeting smiles that had once lit up her heart. She tried to push them aside, reminding herself that this was the past, that she was strong, independent, and had survived heartbreak before. But some part of her couldn't help it. The old feelings were returning, uninvited yet undeniable. She felt the same warmth in her chest, the same nervous excitement, the same flutter in her stomach that she had felt when they first met. And worse, she noticed that she wanted those feelings to stay. One evening, Emma stayed late to finish a particularly challenging presentation. The office was quiet, most of her colleagues having left for the day. The soft glow of her desk lamp cast long shadows across the room, and the hum of the air conditioning was the only sound she could hear. She was deeply focused, making last-minute adjustments, when she felt a presence at her desk. Daniel walked past, glancing at her screen. "You've always been meticulous, you know," he repeated, this time softer, almost conversational, but carrying the same weight it had before. Emma looked up, startled. Her stomach fluttered violently, and she realized she had been holding her breath. The sincerity in his tone, the way his eyes met hers so directly, made it impossible to pretend that nothing remained between them. She felt an intense pull, a magnetic force she had thought she had buried. "I thank you," she murmured, trying to steady her voice, but it sounded breathless even to her own ears. Daniel nodded, giving her a small, almost imperceptible smile before stepping back into the hallway. Emma exhaled slowly, leaning back in her chair, her mind racing. How is it possible that he still affects me this way? That a simple glance or a few words could undo months of careful emotional distance? For the next few days, Emma found herself observing him more than she intended. She noticed the way he interacted with others, his professionalism, his patience, his subtle charm, and it made her remember why she had fallen for him in the first place. She also noticed the moments he seemed to hesitate, moments when his gaze would flicker toward her and then quickly look away, as if he, too, was trying to resist old feelings. One afternoon, while reviewing a collaborative project, their hands brushed over the same document. Emma felt a spark shoot through her, involuntary and undeniable. She quickly pulled her hand back, cheeks flushing, and tried to focus on the spreadsheet. But when she looked up, Daniel was smiling faintly, not in a teasing way, but in a way that said he noticed, and perhaps he didn't mind. The truth settled slowly, almost painfully, in her chest. Daniel hadn't changed. He was still the thoughtful, attentive, caring man she had loved, and she still had feelings for him. The realization was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. She wanted to resist, to remind herself of the heartbreak, of the mistakes and the pain of their past. But deep down, she knew some connections couldn't be broken by time or distance. That evening, as Emma left the office, the golden light of sunset streaming through the tall windows, she realized something startling. The old feelings weren't just stirring, they were alive. They had been lying dormant, waiting for a spark, and now that spark had been lit. Every glance, every word, every small act of attention from Daniel reminded her that some love stories never truly end. And as she walked to her car, she felt a mixture of fear and hope. Fear, because she had been hurt before and didn't want to be vulnerable again. Hope, because she had a chance to see him, the man she had once loved, the man she still cared for, in a new light, as a potential second chapter rather than a painful memory. Emma realized then that the past and the present were colliding in ways she could no longer ignore. And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to imagine what might happen if she let herself feel, if she allowed old feelings to return, fully and completely. The evening air was crisp as she drove home, but her heart felt warm, electric, and alive. Old feelings had returned, yes, but so had the possibility of something new, something deeper, stronger, and perhaps more enduring than either of them had dared hope for. It happened after the company's annual gala, a night filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of conversations echoing through the elegantly decorated ballroom. Emma had been enjoying herself, letting the evening sweep her into a routine of polite networking and casual smiles, trying to focus on her colleagues rather than the man who haunted her thoughts. But as she turned toward the elevator, ready to leave, she felt a familiar presence behind her, a soft, deliberate step. Her heart skipped a beat before she even turned. And there he was, Daniel, the man whose memory she had carried for 3 long years, catching up to her in the empty hallway outside the grand ballroom. Daniel looked different tonight. Dressed in his tailored navy suit, he had the same commanding presence, but there was an unusual vulnerability in his posture. His usually confident shoulders were slightly tense, his jaw tight, and his piercing blue eyes held a flicker of uncertainty. It was uncharacteristic of the man who had always seemed untouchable, and it sent a jolt through Emma's chest. "Emma, can we talk?" he asked, his voice low, almost pleading. Her heart raced violently. She felt a rush of heat in her cheeks and a tightening in her stomach. "Daniel, I don't think," she began, trying to assert control over the sudden swirl of emotions. "Please," he interrupted gently, holding up a hand, as if to reassure her. "Just for a minute." Against her better judgment, she nodded. Her mind screamed caution, warning her not to step into a situation that could reopen old wounds, yet a part of her couldn't resist. She followed him down the hallway, the soft carpet muffling their footsteps. The distant noise of the gala faded, leaving only the quiet hum of the building's night lighting, the faint echo of their breaths, and the subtle tension between them. Daniel stopped at a small alcove by the windows, where the city light spilled onto the polished floor, casting long shadows. He took a deep breath, his hands brushing lightly against the sides, as though he were gathering courage. Emma's pulse thundered in her ears as she struggled to steady her own breathing. "I know this is sudden, and maybe it's not the right time, but I've never stopped caring about you," he began, his voice steady yet heavy with emotion. "I made mistakes before, and I can't change the past. But I'm still in love with you, Emma." Time seemed to freeze. Emma felt her knees weaken, her legs trembling beneath her. She had spent months convincing herself that she was over him, that the memories of their love, and of their heartbreak, were nothing more than echoes of a chapter long closed. Yet hearing his words now, spoken with such sincerity, brought every memory, every moment of longing, rushing back. She remembered the late nights they had spent talking about their dreams, the laughter, the quiet moments of connection that had once felt eternal. She remembered the heartbreak, the nights she had cried herself to sleep, the sense of betrayal and loss that had seemed insurmountable. And now, standing in the dimly lit hallway, all of it surged forward, as vivid and raw as the day it had happened. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice barely audible, fragile in the quiet of the empty corridor. Daniel took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. He didn't reach for her, didn't attempt to touch her, but the intensity of his presence was overwhelming. "Then don't say anything now," he said softly, his voice a bomb and a fire all at once. "Just feel it. That's enough." Emma's mind whirled. Feel it? How am I supposed to just feel it when everything inside me is screaming caution? She wanted to run, to retreat into the safety of professionalism, to hide behind walls she had built to protect her heart. But she couldn't move. She couldn't resist the magnetic pull of the man before her, the man who had once known her so completely, and who now seemed to be standing in that same space, offering a second chance without words, only sincerity. The city lights glittered through the windows, reflecting off the walls and casting a soft glow around them. The world outside continued to move, cars passing, distant sirens, life carrying on. But for Emma and Daniel, time had slowed. It was as if the universe had carved out a bubble just for them, a moment suspended between past and present, heartbreak and hope. Daniel's expression softened further, the vulnerability in his eyes breaking through the calm, controlled exterior he usually wore. "I know I hurt you," he said quietly, almost a confession. "And I can't undo that. I wish I could, Emma. I wish I had done things differently. But you need to know none of this, none of what I feel, has ever changed." Emma felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked rapidly, forcing them back, but the warmth in her chest, the rush of emotions she had thought buried, was undeniable. She had been strong, independent, careful, but Daniel's words bypassed every defense she had erected. She wanted to speak, to say something clever, to deflect, to remind him of the past, but no words could capture the complexity of what she felt. Her heart was pounding, her mind spinning, and yet a strange calm settled over her. Somehow, in that moment, she understood that words weren't necessary. Feeling was enough. Daniel watched her closely, as if reading her every thought, every hesitation. He didn't push, didn't demand a response. He simply stood there, patient, steadfast, giving her the space to process what he had revealed. And in his steady presence, Emma realized something remarkable. He had not only returned to her life, but he had returned with honesty, with intention, and with a love that had survived the passage of time. For the first time in years, Emma allowed herself to truly look at him, at the man she had loved, at the man she had feared seeing again. And she realized that despite the pain of the past, despite the uncertainty, there was something undeniable between them, something that neither time nor distance had been able to erase. The elevator dinged in the distance, a reminder that the world outside the hallway continued to exist. But for Emma and Daniel, the moment stretched on, timeless. And as she met his gaze again, she understood, whether they chose to embrace it or not, this confrontation had changed everything. Emma exhaled slowly, her knees still trembling but her resolve strengthening. She didn't have to answer immediately. She didn't have to pretend she had it all figured out. All she needed to do was feel. And in that feeling, she sensed the possibility of something more, a second chance, a new chapter, a love that had survived the test of time. And in that quiet, suspended moment, surrounded by the soft hum of the empty hallway and the glittering city lights beyond the glass, Emma allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, some love stories weren't meant to end. They were only meant to wait for the right moment to begin again. Over the next few days, something unspoken began to shift between Emma and Daniel. The office, which had once felt like a place of routine and professionalism, now held a subtle electricity, a quiet tension that neither of them could ignore. They worked closely together, collaborating on projects, reviewing client proposals, and strategizing for meetings. But there was a new understanding in every interaction. It started with small gestures, a light touch of hands while pointing at the same report, a subtle smile shared across the conference table, the briefest of glances that lingered just a fraction too long. Each moment was charged with meaning, unspoken yet undeniable, stirring memories of laughter, whispered conversations, and stolen moments from their shared past. The spark between them was no longer dormant. It had reignited quietly, steadily, like embers fanned back into a gentle, glowing flame. Emma found herself noticing things she hadn't before. The way Daniel would pause to ask if she had eaten lunch, the little way he adjusted her chair or opened a door without making a show of it, the way his eyes softened when he listened to her ideas. She realized, with a sudden clarity, that the man standing before her wasn't just her boss. He was the man who had once held her heart, the one who had known her completely, loved her fiercely, and left a gap she had never fully filled. And Daniel, in turn, showed through his words and actions that some feelings never truly fade. It wasn't just that he cared professionally. It was in the way he remembered her habits, the way he encouraged her ideas, the way he allowed her to shine without feeling threatened by it. Each gesture was a reminder of who they had been and who they could be again. One afternoon, after a particularly productive meeting, they lingered at the conference room table longer than necessary. The other team members had already left, leaving the room quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint rustle of papers. Daniel leaned slightly closer, his eyes meeting hers with that familiar, soft intensity. "I'm glad you're here, not just at work, but here with me," he said, his voice low and warm, carrying an intimacy that made her heart flutter. Emma's chest tightened. She felt a rush of emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: relief, joy, anticipation, and the quiet thrill of recognition that the connection between them was still alive. She smiled back, softly, almost shyly, yet her eyes held a depth of feeling that words could never fully express. Her heart felt full, as though it had been mending silently, waiting for this exact moment to finally breathe again. Maybe some stories didn't end, she realized. Maybe they simply paused, waiting for the right moment, the right circumstances, or the courage to start again. And perhaps that moment had come. In the days that followed, the office began to feel different. There was a sense of ease between them now, a comfort that hadn't existed before. They shared small jokes, exchanged knowing smiles, and their teamwork became almost seamless, as if the shared history between them allowed for an unspoken synchronization of thought and action. Even mundane tasks became opportunities for connection, for subtle flirtation, for rediscovering the bond they had thought lost. Emma found herself looking forward to their interactions, catching her breath when he complimented her work, feeling a thrill when he offered to review or report together. She noticed that Daniel's calm confidence had softened into a gentle attentiveness, a quiet reassurance that made her feel safe, seen, and appreciated. And in return, she allowed herself to open, to share ideas more freely, to laugh at his occasional dry humor, to let the warmth of his presence fill the spaces she had kept guarded. One evening, as the office emptied and the golden light of sunset streamed through the glass walls, they stayed behind to finalize a project. Emma gathered her notes, and Daniel walked over to her side, glancing at the charts on the desk. "I've always admired your dedication," he said, not as a boss, but as someone who truly knew her. His voice was soft, sincere, and laden with meaning. Emma looked up, meeting his gaze. The sunlight caught his hair, the sharp line of his jaw, the warmth in his eyes, and her heart ached with a familiar yet comforting pull. "Thank you, Daniel," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She realized, in that quiet moment, that this man, her boss, her ex, her potential future, had become a part of her daily life in a way that was thrilling and terrifying all at once. As they packed up to leave, Daniel held the door for her, and their hands brushed lightly. Neither pulled away immediately. Emma felt the warmth linger, a subtle confirmation of what they both knew but hadn't yet spoken aloud. It was a gentle, quiet acknowledgement of the possibilities that lay ahead. The city outside glowed with the last light of the day. Emma and Daniel stepped out together, walking side by side through the lobby, their movements synchronized almost instinctively. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain from earlier showers, and the streets shimmered with reflections of city lights. There was a sense of anticipation in every step, a silent acknowledgement that their story was far from over. And as they reached the street, the camera of imagination pans out, if one were to see them from above, showing two people with a shared past, cautiously but deliberately stepping toward a future neither had dared to imagine. The distance between them shrinks, not through force or haste, but through the gentle, persistent pull of familiarity, trust, and rekindled love. Emma's heart felt light yet full, a perfect balance of hope and nervous excitement. Daniel's presence beside her was no longer just the authority of a boss. It was the steady comfort of someone who had once loved her and was willing to love her again. They were moving forward together, not by accident, but by choice. Each step a testament to the resilience of the heart, the unpredictability of fate, and the enduring power of connection. In that quiet, cinematic moment, it was clear. Love, even after heartbreak, can find its way back. Sometimes it waits patiently, quietly, for the right moment, for the right circumstances, for the courage to return to what matters most. Emma and Daniel had found that moment, and as they walked into the evening together, possibilities stretched before them like the city lights, endless, luminous, and full of promise. From heartbreak to a second chance, some stories are worth waiting for. Emma and Daniel's journey reminds us that love can surprise us when we least expect it. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to join us for more heartwarming tales.